Okay, well, this video is going to be a little different, and I know I haven't made one in a while, but instead of talking about economics, I'm going to be talking about the CIA, because I've been seeing a lot of news about them lately with the nomination of Gina Haspel as the new head of it, and I have to think that if people didn't like her and what she's done with the torture and the waterboarding, they wouldn't like the CIA in its totality, because the CIA has an extraordinarily large history of crimes that are even worse than that. So what I'm going to do is talk about what they've done and where they've done it at, and under which president, starting off with President Eisenhower. And to start off the video, I'm going to show two other videos of people that I think really encapsulate my thoughts about the CIA and why I think they should be labeled a terrorist organization.
You've been outspoken on this, saying that journalists should be very skeptical of the U.S. government claims. Lay out your case for us.
So I think everybody would agree that it's certainly plausible that this is something that Russia might have done. I certainly wouldn't put it past them. It wouldn't shock me if it turns out that they did. This is the sort of thing Russia and the U.S. have done to other countries and to one another for many decades, including over the last 10 years. So nobody would say Russia didn't do it or that it would be shocking if they did. But there's a lesson, a really critical lesson that I thought we had learned back in August 1964 when the U.S. Senate stood up and authorized Lyndon Johnson to escalate the war in Vietnam with 2 dissenting votes based on the intelligence community's claims about what happened in the Gulf of Tonkin that turned out to be totally false. And the same lesson in 2002 when a group of bipartisan senators assured the nation that the intelligence community convinced them that Saddam had weapons of mass destruction and was in an alliance with al-Qaeda. And the same lesson we learned in 2013 when just months before the Snowden reporting, James Clapper, President Obama's top national security official, lied to the faces of the country when he said that he wants to assure everybody that the NSA doesn't collect data on millions of Americans. And that lesson is we don't just blindly and uncritically accept the claims of the intelligence community, especially provocative claims about a foreign adversary, without seeing convincing evidence presented by them that those claims are true. And we absolutely have not seen that in this case.
I don't trust a single thing the CIA says now or has ever said, okay, and have excellent reason not to do so. Had to write a whole book about how it was the CIA who told the South Africans where to find Nelson Mandela when he was on the run because the South African police were too dumb to find him. About Chile, about Guatemala, about Greece, about Indonesia, a record of crime and disinformation and lying to the American people. And I'm currently a plaintiff in a lawsuit brought by the ACLU against the National Security Agency, for doing what it knows how to do, which is bug American citizens, instead of doing what it appears not to know how to do, which is how to predict terrorist attacks in the United States.
Okay, as I said earlier, the first person is President Dwight D. Eisenhower, and I personally think he set the precedent for the CIA being the terrorist organization it is now due to his tough fight against communism, which was idiotic from the start. Because communism isn't something you need to fight, the very idea of it cannot work, but that is a video for another time. The first of many countries is Guatemala, where the 1954 Guatemalan coup d'etat was the result of what is known as Operation PB Success, which was the successor to aborted Operation PB Fortune under Truman. PB Success was where the CIA orchestrated the takeover and deposition of Democrat-elected President Jacob R. Bentz and placed dictator Carlos Castillo Armas as the new head of the authoritarian government. Now, someone might ask why would they do this, and the response given is that they were trying to stop the spread of communism in Guatemala, which we now know is false and was completely unproven claim, because Arbenz was not a communist even though some of his allies were, and if you looked at what he was doing while in power before his demise, he was just like President FDR when he was implementing his New Deal policies. The truth is that PB Success, which came from PB Fortune, was due to the lobbying of the United Fruit Company. I'm not going into full detail, but some of the examples of what the CIA did in Guatemala was dropping napalm bombs in Puerto San Jose and this SS Springfield, which was a British cargo ship, an extensive campaign of psychological warfare, which consisted of distributing tens of thousands of leaflets throughout Latin America and persuading friendly governments to screen video footage of Guatemala that supported the U.S. version of events. The CIA also ran a radio station which broadcasted anti-government propaganda and a version of military events favorable to the rebellion, claiming to be genuine news, as well as bombings of Guatemala City and a naval blockade of Guatemala. At the end of it, PB Success accomplished nothing but killing 200,000 people, especially among the Mayan population, which endured a genocidal scorched earth campaign, and creating 4 decades of civil war from 1960 to 1999. And Castillo Armas was assassinated 3 years after being given power. The CIA's actions were so unjustified that after the coup, they launched an operation called PB History to find anything that justified the coup, and nothing was discovered to prove the claim that Guatemala was under the influence of the Soviet Union. The United States' involvement was so horrific that in March 1999, President Bill Clinton apologized in Guatemala City for the atrocities committed by the U.S.-backed dictatorships. And I found this 3-minute long video that I think is really good about PB's success.
From its birth in 1776, the United States had grown and grown. Where its flag did not fly, its troops or agents often intervened.
To create a sense of fear and confusion amongst the general population, in the community.
Of the Soviet Union, stay out of this hemisphere. And don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here. Translation.
Crusade for freedom is your chance and mine to fight communism.
The engineering of consent is the very essence of the democratic process, the freedom to persuade and suggest.
And don't try to start your plans and your conspiracies over here.
The CIA creates a clandestine rebel radio station to spread misinformation. Agents recruit students to distribute thousands of posters. They also provide guns and money to peasants to play the part of a revolutionary army. They target Arbenz's army with threatening leaflets. And just to be really sure, they spread rumor, intimidate, and offer bribes to some of the officers. He invites prominent journalists to tour the country. And who do they happen to be? Well, carefully selected local politicians who, of course, confirm the worsening conditions. Bernays has manipulated the American media and the American government into buying his lie that Arbenz is a dangerous communist.
The American PB Success campaign brought the government down and drove Arbenz and his wife into exile. 9,000 of his supporters were arrested. Many were kept in jail without trial for years.
The next 3 leaders of Guatemala died violent deaths. Amnesty International tells us that 85,000 people have been killed by subsequent governments in Guatemala that are supported by the United States. This is not making friends for the United States in the long haul, I assure you. And United Fruit Company went bankrupt. The president jumped through a window of the Pan Am building and killed himself.
Next, under President Eisenhower, are the countries of Iran, Syria, the Congo, and the start of the travesties in Indonesia. And I'm going to be keeping these short because I don't want to make a long video and there's much to talk about, especially there in the reign of Lyndon B. Johnson. In Iran, we had the coup by America and Great Britain under the names of Operation Ajax and Operation Boots, which was the name given by MI6, which removed Democratic-elected Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, all for the conquest of cheap oil from Iran after he nationalized the oil industry. With his removal, an authoritarian monarchy under the rule of Western autocrat Shah Mohammad Reza led to years of oppressive rule, and his status as a dictator put in power by foreign powers led to the violent uprisings in Iran and riots starting in 1978 until he fled Iran on January 16, 1979, which then led to the establishment of the Islamic theocracy we now know that set the entire country back 1,000 years. Syria, 1956 and 1957, you had Operation Straggle and Operation Weapon, which were 2 military-style coups, and even earlier was the CIA's involvement in the 1949 March Bloodless coup. Operation Strago was a CIA financing a coup by providing $167,000, which calculated for inflation is about $1.5 million, to the military takeover of Syria, but it didn't happen because Israel invaded Egypt. And Operation Wapan was the CIA again trying to finance a coup by bribing military officials with about $3 million, which calculated for inflation is about $27.6 million. And that coup failed when some of the officers revealed the plan to Syrian intelligence service. They turned in the CIA bribe money and identified the officers who had tendered it. Operation Wapan also included arming Syria's neighbors and getting Turkey to send soldiers to the borders. There was also the 1957 assassination attempt at 3 Syrian officials in Damascus with the help of MI6. Indonesia. And even though a lot of the travesties that happened in Indonesia didn't start till Lyndon B. Johnson, the groundwork for what happened really started under President Eisenhower. In 1955, you had the CIA trying to assassinate President Sukarno, and over the 3 years from that failed attempt, they financed his political opponents and bribed public officials, and this was all the build-up to the September 25th, 1957, when President Eisenhower finally ordered the CIA to overthrow the Sukarno government. In 1958, elements of the Indonesian military, with the support of the CIA, rebelled against the rule of President Sukarno. This attempted coup ended in failure, as has had many other previous CIA overthrows attempts in both Indonesia and abroad. In 1958, the CIA backed armed regional rebellions against the central government, only calling off operations after American pilot Alan Pope was captured while conducting bombing operations that killed Indonesian soldiers and civilians. The Congo. Okay, I was going to make this one short, but this one actually had an impact on America because it was one of the 14 investigations made by the famous Church Committee. And the Church Committee was created by Idaho Senator Frank Church in 1975 to investigate abuses by the CIA, NSA, FBI, and the IRS. Among the 14 reports made by the Church Committee was the assassination attempt of foreign leader Patrice Lumumba. The assassination attempt that was authorized by President Eisenhower was supposed to be done using a powerful poison created by CIA chemist Sidney Gottlieb, who was an important figure in the CIA's assassination mind control program, codenamed Project MKUltra. And I'll leave a link to that in the description. Among the other plans was also a sniper fire, but that didn't happen because Larry Delvin, who was a CIA field agent, was reluctant to do it. While the CIA didn't have a direct hand in the murder of Patrice Lumumba, documents from the Church Committee revealed that the Congolese leaders who had killed Lumumba, including Mobutu Sese Seko and Joseph Kasavubu, received money and weapons directly from the CIA under the name Project Wizard. President John F. Kennedy. And naturally, the event people are going to think of is the Bay of Pigs, the CIA tried to kill Castro, the exploding cigar, and all that other stuff they did, so I'm not going to talk about that. But there were 2 other events that happened, and one was the Dominican Republic, which was actually one of the investigations under the famous Church Committee, and that was the CIA's involvement in the assassination of Rafael Trujillo. And while the Church Committee was never able to find any proof that the CIA directly killed him, it was found out that both the Eisenhower and Kennedy administration encouraged the overthrow of his administration, and that the army of dissidents did occur. But the other event that I want to talk about is, like, it didn't actually happen to certain countries, but it is something that is very serious and very suspicious, and that was Operation Northwoods. And this was, and I'm not trying to post any conspiracy theories when I talk about this, but Operation Northwoods is what proposed by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and called for fake and actual terrorist actions committed by the CIA and other governmental groups against the United States, but done in a way that they could blame Cuba. This would provide a pretext for launching a full-scale military invasion of the island nation and the removal of Fidel Castro. And even though this operation was never approved, and then President Kennedy and the person that proposed it, Lemnitzer, was removed as the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, it is suspicious because there are certain events that have happened in American history, like the events of the Gulf of Tonkin, that we should be very skeptical about and wonder who are these people that are proposing such. Okay, now this is one of my favorite parts because I don't like this president at all, and that is President Lyndon B. Johnson, who was in office from 1963 to 1969. And naturally, I'm going to start off with Vietnam, which what Glenn Greenwald was talking about with the CIA lying about the events of the Gulf of Tonkin so they could escalate the war. And the other things that they did was they backed a coup by General Dong Von Min in November of 1963, the arrest and assassination of Nguyen Dinh Diem, the president of South Vietnam at the time. The Phoenix program, which ran from 1965 to 1972, which was designed to identify and destroy the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam, or the Viet Cong, via infiltration, capture, interrogation, and assassination. And by 1972, the end of it, Phoenix operatives neutralized 81,740 suspected NLF operatives, informants, and supporters, of whom 26,000 and between 26,000 and 41,000 were killed, which then leads into Indonesia in the 1965 purges, or commonly known as the Indonesian mass killings of 1965 and 1966, where historians aren't exactly sure how many people were killed, but the number ranges from 500,000 at the minimum to about 3 million at the maximum. And it was found that Robert J. Martins, the political officer of the U.S. Embassy in Jakarta, led a group of State Department and CIA officials who drew the list of roughly 5,000 Communist Party operatives And in 1965, when General Suharto blamed the military purge on a PKI coup plot, the CIA supplied communications equipment to him to spread his false reports. Brazil, 1964. The United States backed the 1964 coup led by Roberto Castelo Branco, then Chief Staff of the Brazilian Army. In the days leading up to the coup, the CIA encouraged street rallies against the government and provided fuel and arms of non-U.S. origin to those back in the military. Information from the National Security Archives, and if you like this kind of stuff, is a great source to use, show that President Johnson urged the overthrow of Brazil, and they created a naval task force off the coast of Brazil to support the coup, an airlift campaign to supply about 110 tons of ammunition and other equipment, including CS agent, a special gas for mob control. We did a lot of things in Brazil, and there's so much to go into. You then have the secret, or in reality, the not-so-secret wars in Laos. And these were called the secret wars because instead of being open about its warfare, like the troops being sent into Vietnam, the CIA was hiring mercenaries mainly from the Hmong tribe to fight the war. Laos is actually a major turning point in the history of the CIA because it transformed the CIA from a primarily intelligence gathering agency into a powerful paramilitary force. There's a couple of ways to break down what's happening in Laos. The first I want to talk about is the extensive bombing campaign the CIA did. From 1964 to 1973, the CIA dropped more than 2 million tons of ordnance on Laos during the 580,000 bombing missions, and up to a third of the bombs dropped did not explode, leaving Laos contaminated with vast quantities of unexploded ordnance. More bombs were dropped on Laos than over Germany and Japan in World War II combined, and from 1964 to 1970, Laos was one of the most heavily bombed countries per capita in history. Another side is the CIA guerrilla program that eventually became a full-scale military force. The CIA in the early 60s started arming and training tribes in Laos, mainly the Hmong tribe being the most recognized. On the ground in northern Laos, a handful of CIA officers directed as many as 85,000 soldiers drawn from the mountain tribes. The other side I want to talk about is the logistics of those secret wars. The CIA operated a covert airline called Air America that profited from drug trafficking of heroin from Laos to America. There have been disagreements on this, even if this was true or not, but from most of the sources I've seen, it's pretty much a true fact. And lastly is Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, and he was the first president of the first free nation in Africa, and founding father of the Pan-Africanist movement. And, even though he wasn't a good person, I'm from there, and my parents have told me about this person, my other relatives told me about this person. This guy was going to go regardless, but still, the CIA did help in overthrowing him by invoking anti-Kuma sentiment and then causing the coup. Howard Bain, who was the CIA station chief in Accra, engineered the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. And inside the CIA, it was quite clear. Howard got a double promotion, was awarded the intelligence star for the overthrow of Kwame. That's pretty much it, man. This guy wasn't good, so they were going to get rid of him regardless. Okay, well, that's it for part 1. I guess I'll be making part 2 sometime. I'm not really sure when. But I want to wrap this up by showing 2 short little videos. One is about John Stockwell, because I think he's actually a really interesting person to know, and I've been watching a couple of his things. And the other one is President Eisenhower's ending speech when he was leaving office, when he was talking about the military-industrial complex. I don't know if he made it because he realized the mistakes that he made while he was in office, and he was trying to warn future presidents.
My expertise, as you know, is CIA, Marine Corps, 3 CIA secret wars. I had a position in the National Security Council in 1975 as the chief of the Angola task force running the secret war in Angola. It was the 3rd CIA secret war I was part of. The National Security law creating the National Security Council and the CIA, as you know, was passed in 1947. The CIA was given this charter to perform such other duties and functions as might be necessary to the national security interests, and given a vague authority to protect its sources and methods. And I think it was in the mid-'80s that I coined this phrase, the Third World War, because in my research I realized that we were not attacking the Soviet Union and the CIA's activities. We were attacking people in the Third World. And I'm going to just quickly, in the interest of time, just give you a little sense of what that means, this Third World War. Basically, it's the third, I believe, in terms of loss of life and human destruction, the 3rd bloodiest war in all of history. They undertake to run operations in every corner of the globe. They also undertook the license of operating just totally above and beyond U.S. laws. They had a license, if you will, to kill, but also they took that to a license to smuggle drugs, a license to do all kinds of things to other people in other societies in violation of international law, our law, and every principle of nations working together for a healthier and more peaceful world. Meanwhile, again, they battled to convert the U.S. legal system
in such a way that it would give them control of our society. Now, we have massive documentation of what they call the secret wars of the CIA. We don't have to guess or speculate. We had the Church Committee investigate them in 1975, gave us our first really in-depth, powerful look inside this structure. Senator Church said in the 14 years before he did his investigation that he found they had run 900 major operations and 3,000 minor operations. And if you extrapolate that over the whole period of the 40-odd years that we've had a CIA, you come up with 3,000 major operations and over 10,000 minor operations. Every one of them illegal, every one of them disruptive of the lives and societies of other peoples, and many of them bloody and gory beyond comprehension almost. Extensively, we manipulated and organized the overthrow of functioning constitutional democracies in other countries. We organized secret armies and directed them to fight in just about every continent in the world. We encouraged ethnic minorities to rise up and fight, people like the Mosquito Indians in Nicaragua, the Kurds in the Middle East, the Monks in Southeast Asia. We have organized, and we still do, and fund death squads in countries around the world, like the Treasury Police in El Salvador, which are responsible for most of the killing of the 50,000 people just in the 80s, and there was 70,000 before that. And orchestration, CIA, secret teams, and propaganda led us directly into the Korean War. We were attacking China from the islands, Quemoy, Matsu, Thailand, Tibet. A lot of drug trafficking involved in this, by the way, until eventually we convinced ourselves to fight the Chinese in Korea. And we had the Korean War, and 1 million people were killed. Same thing for the Vietnam War, and we have extensive documentation of how the CIA was involved at every level, or the national security complex, because it's a very cooperative thing, into manipulating the nation into the Vietnam War. And we wound up creating the Golden Triangle, in which the CIA, Air America airplanes were flying in arms to our allies and flying back out with heroin. We launched the largest, this is something that Jimmy Carter did, Admiral Turner brags about it, the operation in Afghanistan. Biggest single operation, I'm told, in the history of the CIA's secret wars. And sure enough, very quickly we produced the Golden Crescent, which is still the largest source of heroin perhaps in the world today. Trying to summarize this Third World War that the CIA, the U.S. national security complex with the military all interwoven in it in many different ways, has been waging. Let me just put it this way. The best heads that I coordinate with studying this thing, we count at least minimum figure 6 million people who've been killed in this long 40-year war that we've waged against the people of the Third World. These are not Soviets. We have not been parachuting teams into the Soviet Union to kill and hurt and maim people, especially not since 1954, when they developed actually a capability of dropping atomic weapons on the United States. They aren't British, French, Swedes, Swiss, Belgians. We don't do bloody, gory operations in the countries of Europe. These are all people of the Third World. They're people of countries like the Congo, Vietnam, Kampuchea, Indonesia, Nicaragua, where conspicuously they nor their governments do not have the capability of doing any physical hurt to the United States. They don't have ICBMs, they don't have armies or navies. They could not hurt us if they wanted to. There has rarely been any evidence that they really wanted to. And that, in fact, is perhaps the whole point. If they had had ICBMs, we probably wouldn't have done the things to them for fear of retaliation. Cheap shots, if you will, killing people of other countries of the world who cannot defend themselves under the guise of secrecy and under the rubric of national security.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. we must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. As we peer into society's future, we, you and I, and our government must avoid the impulse to live only for today, plundering for our own ease and convenience the precious resources of tomorrow. We cannot mortgage the material assets of our grandchildren without risking the loss also of their political and spiritual heritage. We want democracy to survive for all generations to come, not to become the insolvent phantom of tomorrow. During the long lane of the history yet to be written, America knows that this world of ours, ever growing smaller, must avoid becoming a community of dreadful fear and hate, and be instead a proud confederation of mutual trust and respect. Such a confederation must be one of equals. The weakest must come to the conference table with the same confidence as do we, protected as we are by our moral, economic, and military strength. Together we must learn how to compose differences, not with arms, but with intellect and decent purpose. Because this need is so sharp and apparent, I confess that I lay down my official responsibilities in this field with a definite sense of disappointment. As one who has witnessed the horror and the lingering sadness of war, as one who knows that another war could utterly destroy this civilization which has been so slowly and painfully built over thousands of years, I wish I could say tonight that a lasting peace is in sight. But so much remains to be done.